Hello and welcome to the Practitioner podcast. This is a podcast from us at Renaissance. We're a network of missional practitioners and microchurches in the greater Boston area. Every episode here, we talk about themes on living on mission and living in microchurch community. Our hope is that our conversations always touch on the practical and the realities of everyday ordinary people. This is because our mission is about cultivating beautiful kingdom people embedded in the everyday stuff of life. And today, you have me again, Christine Lee, and I am here with the one and only
Drew Thurman.
Drew, good to see you.
Good to see you. I'm over it. Thankfully, I think as the time of this recording, we have some end in sight. Next week looks like good weather is coming. So
did you get snow last night?
Yeah. More like sleet and like freezing rain. So it was just like an ice skating rink this morning. So
perfect.
But yeah.
I always brace myself though for like one more big snowstorm in April.
Yes. Well, I always feel like next week we're going to be in the 60s, at least in the Boston area. And I know it's just toying with us before we get hit one more time. Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
Always.
Well, I'm actually going to bring the banter topic this time. This will be kind of fun.
Okay.
With the topic that we're going to be talking about, we're going to be hitting on AI here in a little bit, which is your topic. Mm-hmm. So in light of that, I thought it would be fun. What is your favorite, which is kind of a weird question to ask, but what is your favorite dystopian book or movie?
Yeah, I love this question, and I guess to show a little bit about myself, I feel like I've take in a lot of dystopian media, like not the news, but as in fictional media.
It feels on brand.
I know. But I was thinking, I think one of my favorites recently is Severance. Have you watched it?
No, I have so many people that tell me that I need to watch it, and I haven't gotten to it.
You have to. It's just so well done. I feel like I love the cinematography, like in general, just like as art, but the concept is so interesting. So I think maybe I love it even more because now I work in corporate America. But the idea is just like when you go to your corporate job, your mind gets severed and you like don't know your life outside of your job. And when you're in your job, like you're one person, and then when you're out of your job, you're a different person. So it's like this elevator severs you as you get down to your floor for your work. And I don't know, it's like I've watched 2 seasons and we still really don't know what their job is or what's going on. But I think it's just like such a fascinating concept because I do think there's so much about working in corporate where the stereotype is like we're all cogs in a machine and this job doesn't really matter and like I'm wasting my life. But at the same time, I think it brings up such interesting ethics of like when you're trapping a part of yourself to only work. What does that mean? And can our whole lives be work? So I just think it brings up so many great questions about our relationship with work and meaning and purpose in like a very stark, kind of scary way. What about you?
I'm the opposite. This is not my favorite genre. So I force myself a lot, but there have been a few, like, especially in terms of like TV and movies, like there's a few, but I often, like, for whatever reason, want my free time to be a little more enjoyable or not feel so heavy. So I don't always dwell on this, but I do remember in high school, like Ray Bradbury, Fahrenheit 451 was one of the very first like books in this genre that I was like, oh, I actually do like some of this. And I would probably say to this day, Cormac McCarthy's The Road is one of my favorite books. Anyone that's read that book knows why. It's dark and it's bleak at times, but Cormac McCarthy kind of has a pretty incredible following for a reason. And I would probably say for me, that is kind of the top of the top. And I feel like there's a lot of imitations now based off of that because it was such a trendsetter.
What do you love about it?
I think it, devoid of so much else, it teaches you a lot about the human condition. And I think in particular a little bit about the importance still at the end of the world, in the darkest place, how much human connection still matters. So like, I think is some of what really hits me in that. So yeah, that would be it for me. So yeah. fun. We are going, hopefully not be so bleak, though this is where we're headed a little bit. You actually, I think when we were talking about what our next episode was going to be, we knew you were going to be bringing the topic, and I was like, what are you thinking? And you texted me, or we had a phone conversation too, that you mentioned this. So I'd love for you to introduce our topic and then give a little bit of background on why you thought we needed to be chatting about this on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm so excited. And I will say we should account that I do have a more dystopian personality, and it's no surprise that you don't. But today we're going to talk about missional practitionership in the age of AI. And this is not just because I work at a tech company, I promise. But I just think like this is a really, really important moment in technology and a technology that has a lot of ramifications about the way our world works. And I know that can sound just like are Drew and me just gonna like, monologue about AI for the next like 40 minutes. No, the answer is no. But I think why it's really important is because the ramifications of this technology, just like you were talking about at the end of how you really love that book, it is unearthing so much about the human condition. And I think that also has a lot of ramifications for what it means for us as societies, as communities. And I think it does bring a lot of themes of like hopelessness and fear. And that's what we're going to get into today. And to me, there's so much about what it means to follow Jesus is knowing how to meet fear and what do we do with that. And that's why I feel like it's like an important thing of like, first, I think it's maybe not a lot of us are thinking about this technology, but hopefully if you're listening to this gets you going and like gets you a little bit ahead of the game about what it looks like to follow Jesus as this technology is emerging. But I think second of all, I think so much of what we talk about here at Renaissance is like the goal is not to escape culture or society or the world. It's to live in it and to be like Christ in the midst of it. And so this feels like an important turning point for our world right now that I think need people that know Jesus. And so that's what we're going to be talking about it today. Maybe just like a few quick definitions before we jump in is obviously AI stands for artificial intelligence, which is, if hopefully a lot of us have heard that before. If you haven't, just even like in your science fiction books, like I think we imagine like robots that can do anything. We're not quite there yet. It's more like software right now. And so if you use ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or Perplexity, these are all what they call large language models, which are just software that gives AI. But if you've never tried it out, it's like a chatbot on steroids, and it can really feed language back to you. And the whole idea is that it's ingested like a lot of text from like all of human history, and once it's brought it in, they're able to talk about it. And so you can ask it questions, you can talk to it, and it feels a little bit human, but not quite. And then one more definition I want to give before we kind of get into the rest of our conversation is artificial general intelligence. So this is the apex goal of technology right now, is that right now AI is essentially like taking in a lot of info of what humans have created and then remixing it and spitting it back out in different forms, and that's about as far as it can go. But what a lot of the researchers in this field are trying to get to is artificial general intelligence, which is like, I don't love the way they describe this, and this will get into our conversation, but like technology that has somewhat of its own conscience and consciousness and can create new thoughts and new ideas that supersedes anything human intelligence can do or has done at this point. And so that is the big goal for a lot of these researchers. So if you didn't know that, sorry that you're now in this conversation. But that is what's happening in the world of tech right now. And I feel like those are the two like main points that we need to start off with for the rest of this conversation to make sense.
Yeah, and I think in the show notes we could probably throw a few like articles and podcasts for folks to listen to. I know we've both talked a lot about the Last Invention podcast, which is a really great job giving some of the background on where artificial intelligence has been, where it might be going. If you've not listened to that, would definitely recommend that you, that'll be in the show notes, but that'd be a podcast that you listen to. And I'm sure we'll throw some other reading for you if this is something that you are fascinated in. But before we get in, the only other thing I would say is just want to acknowledge one, we're not experts, so we're not like the goal here is not that we're going to be talking abstractly, but we'll a little bit, but we're going to be trying to move to practitionership. This whole podcast is about themes of what does it look like to be embedded in, and be living on mission in the everyday stuff of life. This has ramifications for that, and so we're going to talk through some of that to get down to that level. And so stick with us, because that's really ultimately where we want to go. And we also just want to acknowledge that we're kind of coming from a couple of different places. Like Christine does work for a tech company. Typically in our text conversation, she's much more interested in some of the inner workings of artificial intelligence, is much more of a user of it. I'm a little bit more AI sober than she is. And I'm probably coming at this more from, I read lots of think pieces and books.
You think
yes,
pieces? No
yes,
way.
yes. If you receive a Substack article from me, it's my love language. Okay, just accept it and know that I care for you deeply. But yes, I'm much more interested in this from a philosophical, existential level. That's what I guess it's kind of funny. I said I want my free time to be enjoyable, but sometimes I'm sitting around and reading
Like dry academia.
Yeah, academic works on the future of mankind. So yeah, I guess we all have our thing. So anyway, so just want to acknowledge that a little bit before we dive in. And because of that, Christine, I think you know much more about what's happening in this moment from the actual the moment we are in from a user interface level now, and where things are kind of at. And so I would love for you to, before we dive into some of the implications, would just be like, why don't you name the moment that we're in as best you can? We obviously just defined some terms, but not everyone listening is familiar with, they might have seen an article come across Apple News when they were on their phone or something on social media, but they might not be as familiar with AI, some of the current developments that are going on. Obviously, you gave us a few terms, but I think, why don't you summarize for folks a little bit about the fact that we kind of are at a critical moment, and there's lots of different projections, but yes, everyone seems to say that the next anywhere from 2 to 10 years are going to be very disruptive for our everyday lives. And so we need to name that moment to talk a little bit about our practitionership. So why don't you first kind of catch people up?
Yeah. So I'm just going to do a quick flyby, and if you really want to get in depth with it, that podcast that Drew mentioned, The Last Invention, is really good at mapping historically what's happened to this current moment. But I think what I want to highlight is that if you're not in the conversation with AI, I think ChatGPT came on the scene in 2022, and it was one of the fastest growing pieces of software, hit 100 million users in the first I don't remember 30 days or something. And it's taken other apps, even really popular ones like TikTok, months and months to get to that type of user count. And so it's something that's getting adopted quickly by people. And at first when it came on the scene, it was kids cheating on their 6th grade English homework. It's my teacher wants me to write a poem about a dog. And this kind of model is really good at that stuff, where it's write me a poem about a dog. It has to be a haiku, and it can spit it back out to you. Is it creative and the best thing ever? No. But it can get the job done. But since then, AI has continued to rapidly evolve. It can do a lot more complex things. At the company I work for, we use some of this stuff to code. And so now AI is able to write lines of code and develop software in ways that it couldn't before. And all that to say, I think the most important thing to highlight is not just oh, let's look at this technology. It's what do the people who are building this technology say about it? And I think what I want us to understand is that there's two camps. This is an overgeneralization, but generally two camps. So there's the accelerationists, so people that are full speed ahead, we're going to reach AGI next year. And then there are the people that are sometimes known as the doomers, which are the ones that are saying, we need to stop, right now, please. And we need to get regulations, and we need to stop making this stuff. And if hearing any of that surprises you, I think the first time I started learning about these two camps, it was really jarring, because it's why do you have these people who are really invested in this field having such strong different opinions. And something really interesting, like fun fact about the AI research world is that most AI researchers have what they call a P-Doom score, which is a score that they give based off of how likely they think AI is going to end all of human civilization. And that's why we're here today. So the accelerationists have this mindset that once AI reaches AGI, it's going to solve all our problems. And that's why they're like all for like, let's spend billions of dollars building data centers. It doesn't matter if we wipe out all the water for these rural communities. We're going to use it up, but it doesn't matter because once we achieve this pinnacle of the technology, there's going to be no more disease. There's not going to be any more wealth disparity. Everybody's going to have what they need. Everybody's going to be happy. Everything's going to be great. And the world's going to have no more problems. And then you have the other side, which are the doomers that are saying, if this technology goes into artificial general intelligence, AGI, we have no way to control it. Because actually, the way this technology is developed, people don't understand why it does the things it does. It's like kind of like a black box mentality of like the inner workings of the tech. No one really knows how it makes decisions or why it makes the decisions that it does, decisions in quotes. And so because of that, there's all these researchers saying, once we get to the point where if AI can think on its own, why would they keep us around? They can make their own decisions in ways where we would get in their way. And so they're going to have no reason, not just to like wipe us all out. And so that's like, again, broad generalization of the two arguments, but you have people that are thinking AI is going to bring us utopia and solve for everything. And then you have people that are saying AI is going to kill us all very soon if we don't stop. And then in the middle ground, we have this moment where as the technology is developing and changing and people, as people do, are investing tons of money into it and trying to see where this technology can take us, it's creating current dread of white collar jobs that have often, like kind of like my job, like are getting removed because can AI do it? Maybe AI can do it. And so we're in this moment where people have a lot of anxiety of like, am I even going to be able to keep my job? Even if you think that in the future AI is going to bring us financial utopia in the middle, right now, I still need to feed my family and I might not have a job tomorrow because the CEO of my company thinks that AI can replace me. And so we're in this moment where there's a lot of different forms of anxieties and there's a lot of big bets across the board, which is why I think it's really fascinating, also really important that as Christians, we are mindful of what's going on.
That's wonderful. So I think you did a perfect job catching folks up. The only thing I would add, and I think this was probably where we're going to be going with this episode, is that there is a whole nother conversation that's breaking out about that I'm seeing even among theologians and folks that are spiritual thinkers about the implications of what this means for our spirituality. And what do we do with this moment? Positive or negative? I really love, there's a really great writer and thinker I follow a lot named Andy Crouch. And he's been way ahead of the curve on this. A few years ago, he actually was anticipating a lot of this and was talking a lot about the technology that already had so much shaped modern life. But he's a master of giving great metaphors. And I think this is a really great for you if everything Christine just said does feel sci-fi and it's like, what in the world? I think a really great way to just, imagine it is if you've ever seen the Disney movie Fantasia, in that movie, Mickey is the apprentice to a sorcerer and ends up having tasks and jobs that he's supposed to do. And when that magician sorcerer is not paying attention, he uses one of the spells to get this broom to come to life and do his work for him. And if the movie just stopped there, that's, we could probably have a discussion about how's this going to work. That, there is something, it sounds great. I don't have to do the work. And Andy Crouch even mentions that we live in an age where there is something we live in such a disenchanted age. There's something very spiritual about creating something beyond ourselves that seems to have powers that we can't totally understand, as you kind of mentioned, something that's bigger than ourselves. And so it's almost spirituality in of itself. Now, obviously, we know, and probably more to the doomer side, if you've watched that, there's unintended consequences. And this is actually true just in all human progress that we know and throughout history. There's always unintended consequences that we can't foresee. Mickey ends up having to do way more work because the broom does all kinds of things that Mickey doesn't want it to do. And it actually is kind of disastrous in some ways. But I think it's a great metaphor to kind of talk about the moment that we're in. And I think you're kind of leading us there. So I would love for you to unpack a little bit more. And again, we're going to slowly move this down to a practitioner level. But what are the implications of this moment? And I think we can maybe dialogue a little bit. What are we hearing from non-Christians and Christians alike when we think about the moment that we're in? Neither one of us are prophets, so we don't know what's going to be coming 5 years from now or 10 years from now. But as best we can tell, what seems like the implications of the moment where we stand right now in 2026?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think we should go back and forth on this because it's complex. But to me, there's like the two sides, right? AI is going to bring us paradise or utopia, and then the other side, AI is going to bring us apocalypse, I think, has lots of ramifications. But let's start with utopia. Like, to me, the point of that argument that AI is going to essentially fix all of our problems and no one's going to be poor, no one's going to ever be sick again, no one's ever going to like need anything for food or water, blah, blah, blah. I think, I think it's us trying to be gods, right? Like, to me, I don't listen to a lot of Christian thinkers about this. I listen to a lot of non-Christian thinkers about AI, which is probably just because of the world I sit in. But every time I listen to people that are sitting in this accelerationist camp, I think my mind goes to like the Tower of Babel. I was like, oh, you really think you can orchestrate and be God? Like, you can control everything. That's the dream. The dream is that soon you're never going to have to die. You're going to have everything you want. No one's going to have any problems, and you can control utopia. And I think one of the things that's really interesting to me is that in this camp, I always feel like listening to people talk from this side, it's like they don't factor in that, like, there's a lot of wealth disparity right now, and they're a part of the problem. Like, it's usually the richest people having these conversations. I'm like, oh, you're really going to give away all your money? And like, no, you're not. And so it's like, it never factors in the human condition, right? Like, I think as Christians, we talk about the fall, and it's like interesting to hear people think that this technology is essentially going to be salvation. It's going to remove the effects of the fall for us, not just externally, but somehow internally as well. And it's almost like people make this like mental leap that like suddenly this technology will emerge and we're all going to be great people that want for nothing and we're never going to fight again. I also think it really gets to the heart of like what people think it means to be human. And maybe one way I'll illustrate this is there's an AI lab called Anthropic, and they build the model called Claude. And one of the ways that they build their model differently is that they're trying to not build it through a bunch of rules. So the other AI labs will like tell chat, like let's take ChatGPT, like don't give people ideas about how to build a bomb. If they ask you how to build a bomb, you say no. If they ask you XYZ, you say no. And they are trying to get to all these rules about things that this AI model shouldn't do. But the way that this other lab, Anthropic, is trying to build it is they have built what they call the Claude Constitution, which is a document of ethics. And so I listened to this person who's like, Drew, you might like them, a philosopher, who has their PhD in ethics, talk about how they're trying to build quote unquote character into Claude and teach Claude how to be essentially a good person, also in quotes. And it's fascinating to hear about how I do think this is like, in some ways I was like, I'm down with this regarding spirituality, but then it veers off, where telling something a bunch of rules doesn't make it good. It just makes it trapped. It doesn't actually shape character. And I think, at least for me, as like a person that grew up evangelical, I was like, yeah, I resonate with that. That rules can only get you so far, right? Like we talk about that in faith of like, the goal is not behavior modification, it's knowing Christ and being changed through encounter, that you want different things. And that's what changes your behavior. It's not saying like, don't do this, do that, don't do this, do that. So as they're building this model, they're trying to infiltrate that. But then part of the conversation is about, like, can a technology be a good person? And is being a good person just having like impulses in text response that have like a veneer of empathy? Or is there something deeper than that of being a good person? And I think to me, like, that side of it really emerges like, oh, some people really think all that it means to be human is like response and action and impact, and that there's really nothing more, nothing substantial. We can build consciousness from a bunch of numbers and electricity, And so I think that side of the conversation really makes me nervous. It really makes me think like we're devaluing human beings as we're like, and it gets framed in like, look at this exciting technology. But I think it often is like, we're forgetting what it means to be human, and we're starting to like not care about that at all. And that makes me feel worried. Does that make sense? What would you add to that? What have you seen?
Yeah, well, I mean, we could record an entire other episode when we start talking about the low anthropology in Silicon Valley and tech spaces, and I don't have anything positive to say about transhumanism, and
Wait,
what? Well, I mean, I think it should. I think it's probably not a great definition, but you're talking about people who are thinking beyond humanity. Almost what you're saying. They're thinking of basically a technology-driven future that devalues what humanity brings, how special we are, and they're really imagining a human machine type future I think just devalues us at the center of creation in so many ways. But I think I've told you this story before. I sat a few years ago with someone from MIT that was at the very front end of the AI kind of revolution, who was very positive, was in the accelerationist camp. And when I pressed him after his presentation, asking, I thought, some very basic morality and philosophical questions, kind of grounded in like, I took an ethics class in college, and I was like, yeah, like this is the problem. And that's a whole nother episode of us, how much we've devalued the humanities, how we don't think. I joke around all the time that we just need to make all these folks watch Jurassic Park or read the book over and over again just to understand where they're headed. But jokes aside, the thing that, as you were talking, that I would add is to bring it down to the level of folks, because I could talk philosophically forever about those things. What I worry about is the implications for day-to-day people, both now and in the next couple of years. And so a couple of my biggest concerns, and I've seen some Christian writers express this. On the one side, I'm concerned with Christians that get wrapped into even what exists now. Really great piece from Matthew Milliner, who I really appreciate, at Comment Magazine. I think he just put it out in the last week or two, admitting his own getting sucked into AI. He kind of did it as like a test exercise, and was shocked to find, because he basically couldn't meet with his spiritual director, and so he posed some of his spiritual questions to it, and was shocked that it didn't just give him good spiritual advice, it gave him the best spiritual advice that he's ever received. And it led him down this road, to the point that like his wife and one of his best friends said, we need to have an intervention. You're getting way too sucked in. And we're not talking about some random Christian. We're talking about someone who teaches at Wheaton and is really brilliant, and is that blown away with the access to thousands of years of Christian tradition at his fingertips, and what he was receiving back. And he jokes a little bit that it was holding up a mirror to his own heart, his own problems that he was having and some of the things that he's looking for and the power that it felt like it gave him. But and the attention, that it's unfiltered attention all the time that he gets from this model. So I worry a little bit about folks that are going to get sucked into some of this. And, we're already hearing stories about people that are getting all kinds of different advice, but also that become very attached and dependent upon some of these language models. So I worry about that. And then on the flip side, I do worry if things go south quickly in the next couple of years. That if people do start losing their jobs in droves, anytime something this radical happens, there seems to be seismic shifts that happen in culture. And who knows the implications economically and to our day-to-day lives. I saw A.J. Swoboda, a theologian, recently post about this, and he was working through this, but just talking about his fear, and I echo this, that people are going to have doubts about God's sovereignty if we do start to head into a more dystopian, transhumanist, very tech future where everything feels like it's algorithms and it's not so much like, where's God in the midst of all of this, in the midst of the code? And will there be so much despair that it'll feel even more difficult to believe in a God? So I think for me, like, deep more moral implications aside, and I can talk theoretically about that forever, I think for me, for like a day-to-day person, maybe in my shoes, who doesn't use it that much but has access to it and can make choices, or might have a job that gets implicated by it, like, my fear is wholesale adoption and getting sucked into something and not realizing what's happening, or deep despair where it gets very difficult. And I think those are two sides of kind of the almost what you're talking about with the accelerationist and the doomsday type folks. But I think it's more just from a more practical level, the outworkings of some of that for some of us who might. There's a lot of people that might never actually think existentially about what this means, but that's how it will manifest in their day-to-day rhythms and lives.
Yep. Yeah, and I'm just thinking about how, like, I think you're exactly right, that to me both sides of it leads to the same place. If you aren't rooted in anything bigger than yourself, which is just nihilism, like nothing matters, there's no purpose, there's no meaning. Because I think the argument of the accelerationist is that AI is better than humans, and it's gonna be, and that means that you don't really matter that much. And the other side is like, AI is gonna kill us all, and we're all gonna die, so we don't really matter that much, right? And I think that to me is like whether or not you're keyed into this conversation or not, like knowing that there are people that have a lot of money and power that are making things, that's the undergirding thing, is that, like, in so many ways humans are either going to be gotten rid of or they are expendable, and we're gonna find something better. And I think, like, not all of us maybe think about this day to day, but like you're saying, some people use it for, like, I don't know, I have a friend that's like, I always ask it if my outfit looks hot. And it's like, they're using it in silly ways, and it feels like that doesn't really matter. Like, is that gonna, like...
But it does. That habit is forming. Yeah, absolutely.
Right, the habit is forming. And I'm thinking about right now, I'm working with a client that is completely convinced that AI is gonna kill us all in 18 months. And so much of this work with this client is that they just feel like, if that's the case, I have no reason to live anymore. I have no reason to be around. Like, even if I try to live, like, it's going to replace me and my job, and then, like, I'm going to be dead anyway. So what's the point? Right. And to me, I think what I want to infiltrate is, like, this whole conversation about technology is coded. It's like a spear of hopelessness.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like, I think, like, that's what people don't really understand. And I don't want us as followers of Jesus to be surprised when we finally encounter that wall of, like, why do so many people feel hopeless? Why do people feel helpless? Like, and And I think like that this technology is just going to unearth that more and more, which is why it's important for us to think about it and
Yeah.
talk about it and find different ways to live in resistance of it now.
Well, and I think the only other thing I would add to that too is sometimes it's easy to forget how we've gotten here. And I think the reality is for a lot of us, we're okay with this moment and the people are able to push the envelope because there has been a pragmatism when with the adoption of technology and progress for a long time in our culture. And unfortunately, for those of us who are Christians, so much of the church growth evangelical movement has formed us to have wholesale adoption of technology, very because pragmatism was at the baseline of everything. And we can always just use it and have like a faith-based spin on it. And there was never any thought about how is this forming people? How is us doing this? What messages are we sending? What kind of people are we becoming? And I think we need to have more of some more thoughtfulness around this. Going back to some of Andy Crouch's, some of his writing, he talks about the fact that he talks a little bit about the difference between device and instrument. And, that for so many folks, any technology and AI can be a part of this, becomes a device that replaces humanity or replaces difficulty rather than an instrument that promotes human flourishing and well-being.
Yep.
And unfortunately, I think there's a lot of churches that we've been a part of, and I've made some of those decisions. So I'm not pointing the finger at somebody else. We chose a technology or adopted something because it made things more efficient or easier, and we wanted that. We didn't want the resistance. And little did we know, we were actually choosing a device that actually removed some of our personhood and our humanity rather than, being very wise to what instruments we picked because we wanted to promote the flourishing of humanity and relationship and sometimes the difficulty and friction that involves. And so I think some of where we're at is an outgrowth of decisions we've been making for a long time. And I think a lot of my fear is, and I actually threw this on Threads a few days ago, my fear is that the church isn't ready for this moment because we've had no thinking about this. If there's a new technology, we just use it. And we're just like, cool, we'll just add that to what we're doing and figure out some way to continue to stay trendy. Because there's just a pragmatism there. And at best, there's some maybe spiritual formation resources that are like, hey, you should maybe get off social media for 24 hours in Sabbath. But there's nobody that's, and I don't think in Christian spaces very often, asking us to think critically about maybe we just, we might be weird, but maybe we just don't actually adopt that technology, or maybe we need to actually create some resistance, or maybe we need to be okay with analog or friction in this category because it's actually better for our flourishing and our well-being. That conversation's so foreign, and we need to start having it. And I think I'm kind of moving us to this next conversation piece, but I think that needs to be we need to own that we're not here in isolation. We've gotten here very, very, very strategically. It's been a series of a lot of decisions, and I don't know if we're ready for it. And so I would love for you, Christine, out of that, like I'm starting to already move us there, but how do you think all of this impacts ordinary practitioners trying to follow God in the everyday stuff of life? I wouldn't say we've necessarily been overly positive. We've probably been more on the negative side of all of this. But how do you think folks listening to this, what should their mindset be, realizing the moment that we're in and what may be coming down the road very soon?
Yeah, I think like to kind of recap some of what you've said, I do think it's beyond just like how churches adopted technology, but the way that the American church has discipled us to think that ease and expansive, visible growth is the goal. And like, if it feels easy and if it gets us bigger, faster, then it's God. And I think that AI only accelerates that mindset. Just like you called out at the beginning, I use AI a lot more than you. I use it almost every day at work. It's like required at my job that I use it. But it's like interesting because like my job full time is I'm writing about marketing. And so I'll use it for that because honestly, it doesn't matter to me. But whenever I'm writing anything about Jesus and I'm thinking about the things of God, I know I don't use AI. And I use that as just a launching point to say, I think there's something to like understanding that the way we follow Jesus requires, as we always come back to, slow work and patient work, and that friction and suffering is not a deterrent towards becoming like Christ. You know, there's so much that Paul writes about in the New Testament about the way that suffering can shape us and how suffering can lead us closer to who Jesus is, as we participate in his suffering. And I think so much of the one of the promises of AI, at least for one camp, is that it's gonna totally remedy all of our suffering, right? But I think that even if you hear that and you're like, that's crazy sauce, I don't think we can lie to ourselves that all of us want to feel relief from our suffering. Like, that's a very human thing. No one likes to be in pain. It's just that, like, how do you deal with it when you are in pain, right? And we all go to things that aren't good for us when we're in pain to get relief, to escape that a little bit, whether it's like, for me, my silly little games on my phone or reading, or there's healthier ways, going outside, blah, blah, blah. But I think there's just something to recognizing there's something in all of us that we don't like to be in pain and we want the fastest relief possible. But when it comes to being formed like Jesus, is finding the fastest relief possible to our pain always the way that's going to lead us to him? I don't think so. And I think that we have to wrestle with that in the context of our own suffering and pain. But then I think that's what we have to embody to our neighbors and our friends and our communities. That, is there a way to suffer well? Is there a way to suffer in such a way, like, this is like an extreme example, right? And I think that, again, growing up evangelical, I think that this was painted in the wrong way of like using the Christian martyrs as like a sign of like, if somebody's going to ask you if you're going to die for it, Jesus, will you do it? And I'm like, I'm 7. I don't know. I hope so. Like, I don't know. And honestly, we have to, like, at least for us, we live in the United States. Like, that's not really something that's happening for us right now. So I don't think we should blow that out of proportion. But there is something to, I think, the way American culture values ease, values plenty, values wealth, values up and to the right. Mm-hmm. That's the place where it's like, we culturally do not like suffering. And anything that can be like, let's get us up and to the right, that's good stuff. And as Christians, and American Christians, I think we need to resist that. I think we need to find a way to say, when I don't have the things I want, when I don't maybe even have the things I feel like I need, I still find contentment in Christ, and here's what that looks like. What about you? What do you think?
I mean, I don't think I need to add a whole lot. I think you nailed it, and I 100% agree. I think our mindset has to change. The only word I would add, you mentioned wealth. I mean, coming from Matthew 6, the spirit of mammon continues to be a problem for us, and empire has shaped us for a long time and lulled us to sleep with lots of promises that it rarely delivers. And I think what's so strange to me is already we're at a cultural moment that we're looking around and realizing that so much that we have adopted in the last 15 or 20 years has been to our detriment. Mm-hmm. We're not in a good place. And I think anybody in society would name that, like, anxiety rates and are way up. Mental health, we're dealing with a major mental health crisis. People are more isolated than they've ever been. Our average lifespans are going the wrong way. People feel like their lives are meaningless. We feel, even the work that we do, we feel so detached from purpose and meaning. Not to mention all the other ways that we are devaluing each other's humanity, and there's infighting and brokenness. We could go on and on and on, but we're already not in a very good place, and so much of where we're already at have been the failed promises of empire and mammon, and yet here comes more. And it's like we never sit and critically think, like, where have I already adhered or bought into faulty promises? And unfortunately, I was just talking about this in my microchurch last night. Like, I wish more Christians, like we live in this cultural moment where there's so much fighting where people want to use Bible verses and use Jesus to tell the other side how wrong they are. And this isn't just one side, this is both sides. And I don't hear very many people open the Bible and use Jesus to say, you know what? I'm wrong. I've bought into to some things that I shouldn't have bought into. I have work to do. I am not where I need to be. I need to surrender this X, Y, or Z. And I think where our mindset needs to shift is to start there and start to say, where have I already bought into the myths and the lies that empire and mammon have given me? I'm going to be that much better suited to spot future lies if I have the reflection of where I've already bought into lies. And I don't see very much of that. And we're going to get ready here into habits, but I think for me, that's the kind of mindset we need and our microchurches need to start to build in, of having much more reflective space, much more examine space, because I think we're just devoid of it. And using scripture to talk in third person, or to puff ourselves up, or to point out everyone else's faults, is just the opposite. And this doesn't mean, please hear me, I'm not saying that we live in shame. I'm not saying that we don't dwell on the goodness of God or what he's done for us. I believe all of those things. But there's no way to dive into the words of Jesus and not see that salvation is inviting us into a better way to be human. And I don't think often we realize the ways that we've compromised that. And the invitation to true flourishing that we often miss and settle for myths, settle for cheap alternatives. So with that, I know for sake of time, I want to keep us moving forward. But we're talking about our mindset. But building on that, Christine, what sort of habits do you think we have to foster then to push back on what these waters we've been swimming in? It's not going to just be a change of thought. We're going to actually, as we've mentioned on the podcast previously, we don't think our way into a new way of being most of the time. We actually kind of have to have habits that change our heart posture, so to speak, that reorder our loves so that we actually believe the thing that we're hoping. So what sort of habits do you think are going to help us get there? Maybe both individually and then communally, what sort of habits do you think we need to start thinking about?
Yeah, I think when I was thinking about this topic, the two habits that came to mind, one of them is one of my least favorite spiritual disciplines, but it is generosity and then fasting. And I hate fasting. I'm just going to put it out there.
Is there anyone who's like, oh, I love it? I don't know.
I don't know, but I feel like some people are like so spiritual and they're like, I get it. I feel like most of the time I fast, I'm like, well, I was really hungry and mad and I don't know what happened. And it can be like not just food fasts. I've done a lot of those too. But maybe I'll start with generosity. I think to what you're saying, I think I've been really shaped by this, especially from my parents' story. We're immigrants from Hong Kong. And when we first moved to the States, when I was almost 4 years old, up till 6th grade, my parents never had an income. We were on student visas, and they just felt called to come and study the Bible and maybe plant a Chinese church. And, for all the ways that maybe I've diverged from my parents' faith, that is something that I find so much inspiration from. And just like the trust in God that he's going to provide. And growing up, I always saw my parents still be generous. They gave to their churches. They gave to people in need. They would host extravagant dinners and they would pay for that. It's like they just never were tight-fisted about money. And as an adult now, I have just noticed how radical that is. That there are times where I'm like, I make so much more money than my parents ever did when they were raising me. And sometimes it's I'm worried, oh, will I have the money to do this or that? And I just find that the practice of giving more than I think I can afford, and finding and saying yes to those things and finding ways to be generous has really shaped the way that I think about following Jesus, of I do not need to hoard material things. Everything I have comes from God, and if the world blows up, in 2 years because of AI. Like I don't have to be afraid. Like I don't have to live like this is all that there is. And so for me, generosity has been a really important practice of like just stretching myself to think about that there is more than this life and that this life does matter and I can impact others in this life through giving things away. And so to me, that's like a really important practice that has been really helpful for me. And fasting, I think fasting always brings me to a sense of my own limitations, finitude, weakness, and also just like how I love being distracted. I think that's what fasting, like this year for Lent, I'm changing up the way I fast and I'm doing like a full media fast once a week. So like intake of no media, no reading, nothing. And it's just been so eye-opening, like how much my brain wants to go to something else, to just like, even if it's something instructional, to not pay attention to what's happening within me and not pay attention to God. And I think that's probably like what you were getting at with your silent retreat of like when there's nothing left, but like being present to where you are right now. There is a way to experience God, I think, differently. And so for me, something about fasting, all the ways I've tried it, all the ways I've done it, it has really reminded me of how much I need God, how much I need in general, and how much I can't solve in of my own self. And I think those things have really like brought perspective when it feels like the world is going like 500 miles a minute and I don't know what to do. There's something really grounding about being reminded to pray, being reminded I am in this body and it's not going to last forever. And there's so much I can't do, but I can be connected to God. Are there practices that you would add to that?
Well, one, I just want to echo, I love those. I think that's great. And I'm with you. Like, fasting is never positive, like a positive, joyful experience for me, but I always end up on the backside of it being very thankful that I engaged it. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, I mean, there's a couple of things, but the first one that comes to mind is I just think we need to choose embodiment. And so I think, it might just be as simple as trying to keep an embodied, just embodiment log, like on a daily or a weekly level of, I think it can just be micro acts of resistance, like little things that I choose to do the thing that might be more difficult or analog or embodied, just so that I am constantly grounding myself in the world and in other people, and not just in screens in a digital presence. And so, it's as simple, I think, sometimes as can I walk instead of drive? Is that like I'm going to make the choice? It might take me 20 more minutes, but I'm going to choose to take the walk to the grocery store or down to that restaurant. As just a small act of resistance. Or I'm not going to download that book on a Kindle. I'm going to check it out at the library, and so that I'm forced to go in and pick it up and have a human interaction and pick up a physical copy of the book. It's a delayed gratification, but it's worth it. Or I'm not going to buy that thing on Amazon. I'm going to write it down on a sheet on my fridge and wait till the next time I need to go to the store physically and maybe even that. I'm not going to put in for a grocery pickup. I'm going to actually walk in and not have my AirPods in and actually shop in the grocery store, force myself to slow down, see pick products, see where they're coming from, have human interactions with and not even do the digital checkout, like actually go through the physical checkout and like talk to someone who's a grocer, which if you go to Market Basket, like you should, you don't get that choice anyways. You have to talk to someone. Little things for me, like choosing to garden or grow. Like I have a very small gardening plot. I'm not able to completely feed my family, but it's a small act of resistance and it's a small place of embodiment. I get my hands in the dirt. I'm responding to the life that's happening. I'm realizing that there's some of it that's out of my control, dependent on weather and pests and all kinds of other stuff. choosing to meet a friend for a coffee date or going on a walk rather than just texting them or surfing social media. Like whatever it is, I think, and again, you might only get, but depending on your schedule or what you've got going on, can you just do one of those a day or a couple of those a day and keep an inventory? How am I choosing to rebel in just very small ways to be embodied rather than disembodied? Because that's going to help me be more grounded. And I think God's creation, His goodness, and maybe what is truth and what's reality rather than what's just untruths. And then with that, I think as silly as it sounds, I think we have got to be reading Scripture and we have to be reminding ourselves of God's promises. I think too many of us are unfamiliar with what God promises us, what He says. We need to be writing those down, whether as part of our Scripture reading and journaling. In these moments, we have to remind ourselves when things feel hopeless or at their lowest moment that God is still present. And there has been lots of other moments in human history where it felt like everything was coming undone, that it was the end of the world, and people were sure this thing was going to be the end of us. And yet God has proven faithful, and people found even if it felt like a whisper, God's presence and His voice, even in the midst of the darkest times. Again, I was quoting A.J. Swoboda, and he was using Zechariah 1:3, I think is just this great promise of, therefore tell the people, this is what the Lord Almighty says, return to me, declares the Lord Almighty, and I will return to you, says the Lord Almighty. And even in those moments, like if I return, and I really do believe this, I don't think this is mystical thinking, like when we choose to dwell on God's promises and we return to them, it does something for our souls. And I think we experience God's goodness. And so I think we partially are so dysregulated because we're taking in far more negativity and disillusionment and things to produce worry than we do dwell on God's presence and His goodness. We need to have those moments. And then finally, and I would say, by the way, our communities need to do that. We need to also, in our communities, this is why, no offense, we need less monologue. We need more dialogue because we need to talk to each other directly about these things. We need to get across the table from each other and not sit in a disembodied environment where one person talks to us and we have massive screens projecting that image, or we're streaming something. We need to get across the table from one another, hold each other's hands, look in each other's eyes. So important to everything that we're attempting to do. And then finally, my last thing I was going to say is get a spiritual director. We have Dan Lee on our team. I have been so fortunate as to inherit your spiritual director as well, Dr. Neil Wyndham, and who's the best. And I just got done talking to him this week, and talking to him, I've had probably two of the most chaotic months of my life. I felt like I've been so disconnected from some of the normal rhythms and habits. And just that conversation forced me to remind myself of two moments God showed up this month and to say thank you and dwell there. And had I not had that person to help force me to sit there, I would have missed saying thank you and dwelling with the fact that God showed up twice this month in very beautiful ways. You need someone to help you hear God's voice and to see His presence even when it's hard. And so that's what a great spiritual director, or really any spiritual director, is going to do for you. And so if you've never engaged spiritual direction, I would say it is a great way to ground yourself in God's goodness and His voice when it feels very difficult to. So maybe three things there: embodiment, inventory, Scripture, spiritual direction, I think could be really helpful habits right now in this day and age.
Yeah. I think adding to some of the community list, maybe the way I would summarize it is we need community that we allow to inconvenience us. And if you don't have community, if you have a family, your family does not count. Like you need to have people in your life that you're willing to say, "Yep, I will drop whatever I had going on and do your thing instead," even though that's not really what I had planned and that's not really in my own best interest. And I think that's like the community practice of like, hey, like this is what slows us down. This is what reminds us that like we belong to more than just ourselves and our own goals and gains. And that's what church should be. And I think even too, like that's what I love about our microchurch is I feel like it's a dialogue of inconveniencing one another. Like I think so often we're used to church being like this one person tells me what to do and think, and then we all sit there and agree, and then we go home. And last week at our microchurch, it was so jarring to me that I'm like, oh, we are like in a different space, and this is so wonderful. But it still catches me off guard. Like we are talking about prayer, and somebody had a really lovely point of like, yeah, and I think sometimes we forget that prayer is the most powerful thing we can do, like when it comes to injustices in the world. Another person said, "Is it?" And I was just like, well, okay, like we are
Here
in
we go.
different spaces spiritually, and like that is okay. Like, but I think it forces like such a great conversation of like, if you are convinced that prayer is so important, why? Like, and can you do it in a way that is compelling and not just like beating someone over with the stick of like, this is what our group thinks, so shut up. And that's formative. That's formative, like for at least my personal faith, but I think it's formative for our community to like have to really be like, oh, why do we think this stuff if we think it? And how do we love one another and show up for one another, even if we think vastly different things and we're trying to follow Jesus in very different ways? So I think it's so important that we have communities that inconvenience us regularly.
Yeah, I love that dialogue of inconvenience. I'm going to use that, and I would just say it's actually even just it's just a lifestyle of inconvenience because people are going to have needs, and are going to it's we talk a lot about mutuality, but there's never any season that it's perfectly 50-50. There's always an imbalance. Someone has more needs at that given point, and the community's gonna inconvenience themselves to rally around that if they're doing it right. And I think to your point earlier, I think so much of our church tradition, the average family only shows up less than 2 Sundays a month now. You come in, you greet a few people in the lobby, you say hi, you sit down with your coffees, and you listen for an hour, and you go home. And there's very little that's asked of you. And my microchurch is the complete opposite. It feels like so much to carry, and yet that inconvenience is grounding me in my actual flourishing, and I'm actually better because of it. And so I love that. If we're not feeling that inconvenience and that friction, then we have totally missed the point of what God's inviting us into. And it's painful, but it's actually there's so much beauty on the other side of it that the benefits far outweigh the negativity.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask, like, I think as we close out this time, I think it would be awesome if you close this out in encouragement. I know, like, I feel like we started off pretty heady, and I'm just like also thinking about the folks that like might still be stuck there and being like, I've never heard this before, and I'm overwhelmed, and I don't know what to do. So if people feel like listening to this, they don't totally know like where to start. And you give us and finish us off with an encouragement about how we can all still participate in God's work during these turbulent, crazy times.
Well, I mean, as I said earlier, I think we have to remind ourselves, I think we can always be prisoners of the moment. And while I do think we are going through a seismic change in terms of a cultural revolution that's going to change a lot of things as life as we've known it. As a student of history, this has happened many, many times before. And sometimes because we don't understand where people have been in the past, we diminish just how jarring those transitions were. I believe that we can make it through this together, and I believe God will continue to be faithful. So that's always my encouragement. But the other thing I would just encourage people to do right now is, if they can, and I was kind of referring to this earlier, is just to do a better job paying attention. And I am convinced. Simone Weil said this, that attention in its highest form is equivalent to prayer. Um, and there's like a little example where I think she was the one that gave it, but where she talks about like being overwhelmed by your troubles and your and just they feel too weighty, and looking out the window and seeing a bird and getting caught up for a few moments in the beauty of that bird and what it's doing. And for those few moments, you totally forget about everything that's going on and all your difficulties. And sometimes you actually even return to yourself, back to your thoughts, lighter than you did before, just because your attention was fully on something, else. And I think a lot of us, if we can just start to find beauty in the everyday, Mary Oliver has said this, pay attention, be astonished, and tell about it. What are those what are those little moments of beauty that are happening around us all the time, that allow us to get beyond ourselves and our worries and our doubts and our disillusionment and our nihilism, and just see that for what it is. Thank God for that. I think it'll actually help us return to who we are with a little bit more joy, and care and patience. And so that would be my biggest encouragement right now. Like, if everything feels too weighty, turn your phone off, shut the laptop, turn the TV off, and allow yourself to be taken by something small. The bite of an apple, the beauty of a lark, a walk with a friend, a great cup of coffee, of the laughter of a child, the joy of watching your dog go crazy, whatever it is. And thank God for those beautiful moments, because I think in doing so, it's going to create some balance and health. And so much of this is beyond our control, but we can control that. We can control. We can choose joy. We can choose to allow our attention to focus on that which is good, which God has given us, and allow that to start to shape our perspective rather than forecasters both one way or another. So that would be my encouragement of grounding ourselves a little bit, and know that, again, what we're experiencing is not new to the human condition. And others have made it through, and we can too. And God's goodness will guide us even in the midst of this.
Amen. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. We're excited to keep podcasting and getting to be a part of this journey with you and walking through the realities of following God in the everyday. So if you want to find out more about the Renaissance Network, whether it's our microchurches or future cohorts, you can head to wearerenaissance.org. And until next time, bye.